What's good, big girls? Welcome back into the BDGE Dynasty channel. My name's Adam. If you're new to the channel, make sure you're going down and hitting that subscribe button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content that we bring to you here weekly on the game of Dynasty. Yesterday, I ran a live stream last evening, and I'm going to be doing that every week moving forward, gearing up for the season, which is basically here. And because the season is right upon us, this is pretty much like a switch that happens every year in Dynasty. Now, any specific league that I'm playing in, that you're playing in, the exact time in which that light switch seems to get switched and it changes is going to vary a little bit, but typically it's around this same time frame within, let's call it 30 days, where draft picks are in the off season one of the most highly desirable and highly valued pieces of assets out there. Like, everybody wants to have the draft picks, in particular the ones that you're going to be using to draft for rookies this year. So at the point the rookie class now becomes players, maybe at that point those players take higher precedence than future draft picks. But the point overall in general is, at right about now, somewhere between early August, late July, and then certainly early part of September at the latest, you'll feel in your league either a lot of the offers coming into you are going to be trying to have you take on draft picks, or the majority of trades that are going down in leagues, you can kind of feel that everyone's starting to have this feeling all of a sudden, or not maybe everybody, but the large majority, or there's so many people out there that feel like these draft picks are burning a hole in their pocket. So all of a sudden it's time to get rid of them, and it's time to have players for this season, because at the end of the day, draft picks can't go into your lineup. So I think this is something that I really want to talk about. It wasn't what I planned to talk about today, but it's just at the forefront of my mind, and I see so many trades going down where you can just tell it's based on somebody with draft picks that are burning a hole in their pocket, even if they're all the way out into the future years, 2-3 years down the road. So what we're going to do right now is kind of go over, I think, some of the things that are not thought about enough about the draft picks, and really talking about in general trading draft picks, how important timing is for it. And then ultimately, right now during this part of the year, if you're going to be sending in your draft picks, some things to think about, some processes and some guidelines that I've kind of put in place for myself to make sure I'm not giving myself basically too much risk for what the reward probably is on these trades. But before we get into all the details on that, you already know what time it is, man. Let's tuck in. Stop yapping. It's time to eat. All right, so let's get straight into this here, talking about draft picks and how the timing and cycle of them is so interesting in the way that there is basically during the season and the off season, where these assets kind of really, for the large majority or quite a few people in Dynasty, really changes and fluctuates how you really appropriate them because of the way that they're essentially used, right? You feel like a lot of times you're going to end up making the draft pick with the draft pick, and those draft picks can't slide into your flex spot, your quarterback spot, your running back spot, whatever it may be. And with the season here, at this point, everybody's really gearing up for scoring points, right? That kind of is the big deciding factor in this change that most people have in Dynasty at this time of year with draft picks. So point overall that I want to get into here is, I think for myself, I've found a lot of times where I've had the biggest cleanups and the most heartache is when I've kind of pushed my draft picks in with the idea of making my team better. And obviously that does make sense. Like, in theory, just in general, getting players to help build your team the right way and to have, overall a better pool of overall players and talent on your team makes sense for Dynasty value, because they can get into your lineup. But a lot of times I think there's not necessarily enough thought process into what we're doing and why we're getting rid of the picks, other than we just want to make sure that those picks are turned into players, because the players are going to be having a chance to play for our teams. And these are some things to think about, right? Draft picks in general, like I said, they can't go into your lineup. And during the season, people basically, they start throwing them around like candy. Or at this point of the year, especially, you feel like, all right, now I have this first and second. We're looking at the 25 class next year. You start to have, the hype around, or lack of hype around, the 25 class, that the quarterbacks in that class project to be kind of trash. We don't even necessarily know if there's going to be a first round pick in the 25 class in the NFL draft. There are some running backs that are pretty highly touted and talented in the class, but the running back position is super devalued. And we know that pretty much every year there's some good wide receivers like there is in this 25 class. But overall, with all that said, people think that the 25 class is lacking in talent overall across the board in Superflex leagues, relative to certainly 24, which was just loaded from top to bottom, it felt like, from talent perspective, because of all the quarterbacks. And then even the 23 class, which had so much hype, going all the way back to maybe 2022, which felt similar. So when you're seeing those type of things, and now you're thinking about, I don't want to have to wait on this pick until next year because I want to win this year. Everybody wants to win this year. We all want to win our leagues at BDGE, so we get it. But I think it's important to think about, while you want to win now, think about your team in general before you're even moving the draft picks. Really taking a look. I think this is where I talked about last video. You can go back and check that out if you missed it, where doing a team review, I think it's really important to think about the core of your team in the format and roster construction and how you're building your team. Because if you kind of use that as the guideline and the baseline for operating and making sure that your team is in the best position to win, if you have the roster construction ideas kind of set out, making sure that you're kind of in line with what you believe the best roster construction is for you. Ultimately, you make the decision on that. You manage your team. But if you're thinking about it that way, what are you getting with this future pick? So whether it's a first, now first round picks, even at this time of year, people are starting to get a little, I would say, more savvy with not wanting to move them for just any random player more often than not. So maybe the first round picks in general, people are a little more stingy, if you want to call it that, for moving those picks in for a player. But then second round picks, all of a sudden, if I can get a player that has a chance to be a flex spot for my team, is gone in a minute. So thinking about not just what your team looks like on its players' perspective, like how does it compare to the league? And then ultimately, the big question that I'd like to ask myself is, if I'm moving to pick, okay, does this currently fill a void that I'm really needing to address to make this trade right now in the beginning of the year when everybody's 0-0 and we haven't seen really what's going to happen throughout the year with attrition of injuries, with what players are going to disappoint and what players are going to surprise in fantasy football. So even what we project, is it worth right now me doing that? Basically, am I filling a necessary void for me to feel like I need to make this trade now? And then what does that look like, and is that actually the case? If the answer to that is no, what are you actually doing by acquiring this player for the pick? A lot of times what can happen that I've seen is you end up getting a player on your team, right? So you have that extra player, but what really all you've done, you do have depth, sure. And you have extra pieces to make sure that if there's an injury or two or three, that you can slide them into your lineup. That's great. But I'm not saying you shouldn't value depth, especially depending on your format. How much depth you need, though, kind of has its limits and its, I'd say, overall downsides too. For example, if you just acquire a player for a 26 first, a 25 first, even a second, but this is a player now that based on your team in a certain lineup, let's call it, it's a 12-team lineup and we're starting 11 players, which is a little more starters overall average across all the leagues. 11 would be more starters. So let's say now you acquire a player for a second, and that's great. You should be trying to have depth in that format, because overall those type of rosters, when you have to start that many players, it's important to have a good amount of depth. But you may have very well just caused yourself a lot of like heartache and decision making processes on start sit on Sundays, right? Now when bye weeks happen, maybe that's a good thing for you. So ultimately kind of is going to be some wiggle room depending on your roster construction. But if you just acquired another really good player that you can't say right now is confidently going to be sliding into your starting roster and making it better, like obviously, is it a third or fourth round pick? Maybe there's a different discussion there. But if it's not doing that and it's not actually filling that type of a void for your team, if you can't tell yourself this is why, if you're just saying, yeah, I want to have him, I think that's good value, even if it is it making your team that much better? And then the opportunity cost of down the road, what could I do with the second round pick when I might need it at its most? Because the second round pick, a first round pick, a third round pick even, while they can't go in your lineup and they're not going to individually save your team from, having a bad week. What they can do is save your team when you have a need and you're still in the mix for contention and making the playoffs or getting a bye, and you have a first round pick now as the league starts to become more defined, right? There's more certainty from the standings and people are like, man, I'm not going to make the playoffs. And now draft picks to them are a lot more valuable than at this time in general. Not to every single person listening to this, but in general, draft picks are not the thing that everyone's trying to acquire right now. They're trying to find a way to get points into their lineup. And with first round picks and even second round picks, those two especially, if you're sending them away, right, whether it's 2025, 2026, 2027, however far it is down the road, by making this trade, whether the answer to that question prior now is yes or not, obviously you should be trying to do something purposefully and intentionally if you're going to make that type of a trade, I believe, to have the best results. But even if you're saying yes to that, now you want to continue going, are you making yourself so vulnerable right now to really big heartache in like 6, 8, 10 weeks when essentially this can happen? Do you look at your team after this, and if you start looking at your roster overall, I'm going to give you an example here of this, but if you start looking at your roster overall and you just say, okay, I'm going to right now, for the exercise of this, take 2 to 3 critical pieces of this team, right? I'm going to take it away from my team. Is this trade that I'm making now with the roster as it stands, taking away 2 to 3 players, is this team still like really well built? the answer is like, when I look across the league, this certainly could be a problem. You're leaving yourself vulnerable to like having two things essentially, especially without a first or second round pick of your own. You don't have your future, and right now you're not in a position to win. And that is one of the worst feeling positions to be in Dynasty, where you don't have control of your own destiny. And when I look at a lot of teams that are, I'll call it like this, I can spot right away when that type of stuff is out there. It's not even happened yet, but there's a chance it may not come to fruition. But those are teams ultimately I like to try to bet against, and those are teams I think that are often subject to being orphans in our league. So what I want to do here for the exercise is just give you a quick example of this, because there's so many trades going down right now that I see in our channel, on Twitter, wherever, that are a lot of players being acquired for picks. And I'm not saying that you should not do this at all, but I think it's important to at least have a process and thought out reason for why we're doing this, other than just these picks can't go into my lineup and they're burning a hole in our pocket. So what I want to do is actually pull just a recent trade from today. I'm telling you, I went through the lab recently today, which is the 22nd. You're going to see this on the 23rd, where I'm looking at a bunch of trades. Now, draft picks are just a part of big trades that in volume in general. So I'm not really talking about those specifically. I'm talking about more so where you can tell there's an agenda of moving players for picks, where the large majority of one assets on one side is picks and the other one is players. So even if there's a player, let's say on the pick side, it's a tier down in all the players going to one team who's trying to load up on players, and the other person's acquiring picks. Now, I want to do is show you one example, one of the recent ones I just pulled. This one was from today. So this league is Modern Dynasty. This trade was made on the 22nd, and this trade is from Plank Crew and Pistol Pete 26. All right. Now, the interesting part about this, if you take a look at the lab, the trade is Pistol Pete 26 is acquiring DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, and Plank Crew is acquiring picks really far out of 27 first and a 26 second. So I think in general, like if you were to see this trade and let's say we knew nothing about the teams, which right now for context we don't, so we start digging into this, which we're going to do, don't worry. But the 27 first and 26 second, I think DJ Moore, if you're telling me a 25 pick, a first, that right there is probably very palatable for both sides. I'm not saying it would get done. A first and a second in 2025 might be pretty rich for somebody sending away the picks, even right now at this time. So this feels like where Plank Crew in general, he's getting the first and the second as kind of a time discount, right? Because you think about the 27 draft, I mean, we just had the 24 draft. So we're basically looking at not quite 3 full calendar years, but 2 3/4 years away from getting to that actual pick being a selection on the clock. So there's a time decay discount in this trade. But a first and a second, okay, regardless of the time, which I think in general, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be there and it doesn't make sense, but I'm typically of the mindset that I will take picks out a year or two away if there's actually some sort of a discount to be had, because picks are protected in value, and eventually that time is going to be on your side. And you don't also have to wait until 2027 to end up moving this pick in all your leagues. You don't have to make the pick. This is ultimately just currency. So I'm more of the mindset of taking the pick side if there's actually a lot more value to be had, because there's a time discount per se. So when I look at this trade, right now, what I want to do is start digging into the details of this, context of the league, and then also what are we really looking at for both teams. And when you pull up Modern Dynasty on the lab, you can take a look at both teams in the league, their entire roster, the picks that they have at their disposal. It's all pulled from Sleeper's API. And then also you have the league context as it stands currently. So from the redraft perspective, that means like, now these totals are defined and calculated by just ADP values. So basically based on redraft ADP, using that, this has now, after this trade, Pistol Pete is the 4th best team redraft value. That's after acquiring DJ Moore. And then when I look at his team, right, so this team, you got Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs at running backs. You have Devontae Smith, DJ Moore now as your wide receiver 2, Chris Godwin based on ADP. This is your wide receiver 3, okay? So then you have Dalton Kincaid at tight end. Evan Ingram's in the flex currently at the time being. It's a 1.25 tight end premium, so it's not a very high premium. I'm not sure if it actually makes sense to put a tight end there, but based on ADP values where Ingram's going, that's why he's slotted in there. You also have Aaron Jones, James Conner, Aaron Rodgers, Gardner Minshew at backup. You have Jake Browning as well in case Joe Burrow gets hurt again this year. And then the bench, you got Singletary, who has a role, Gus Edwards, who we think has a role. We'll see what actually comes to fruition there. You have Keenan Allen now on the bench, as well as Romeo Doubs, Adam Thielen, Demarcus Robinson, and there's a lot of other names here, but as I start to look through it, right, those are the players that I think are warranted talking about value-wise for your team. Now, when I look at the picks, this is where it just happened to be a good example of what I'm trying to highlight here. I literally just pulled a trade. I wasn't sure what the context was going to be. I wanted to do that right now with you and kind of give you the thought process I have on it from this just one specific lens. Okay, so now I'm looking at Pistol Pete's team. He has no first or second in 2025. He does have 2/3. And then look at 2026. No first and second as well. 2027 now without a first. So this is where I'm actually going to do a quick plug here. This is where it's important if you're a commissioner or you're in a league, check out LeagueSafe, because this is one of the things that I think we need to make sure in Dynasty. Unfortunately, because of the nature of people and the way shit can go down, you got to protect your league and people from themselves, honestly. So LeagueSafe, go down in the description of this video here. There's a link where you can go take your league as the commissioner to LeagueSafe, and you will get $50 towards your buy-in pot as the commissioner of the league by doing so. But what's really cool about it is it puts in some like safeguards for stuff like this. You can do that. Where in LeagueSafe, everybody pays in to LeagueSafe, and that money is going to be held there until it's time to assign payouts. And as the commissioner, you'll set up the payouts of your league, okay? So as you do that, you can also put in stuff like, if you're going to move a future first, there is a cost up front to do so, so that in the event you screw up your team so bad, we're basically stuck with an orphan that nobody wants, and you've stripped out all the future value. In trades like this where you don't literally have a first now until 2028, and at this point, who knows, Pistol Pete might move his 2028. Making sure you're using LeagueSafe for this is really important, because if this team, let's say something really bad was to happen to this team, before I go into all the details, or any team that doesn't enter all the way out in 27, 26, 25, what are you going to do? Who wants to pay the buy-ins for that? Protecting yourself from that with LeagueSafe, I think, is something you can do. Quick plug there, but what I want to go back to is this team now, okay? Let's take a look at Pistol Pete, because he's acquiring DJ Moore, and he's already been moving his picks. And the fact that you don't have your 25 first, okay, like if you were down your 25 first and you're trying to find a way to put more value on your team and win now, like I get that. It's pretty simple, clear, and obvious, but does this trade now warrant putting in more future years for DJ Moore at the cost that you got him? So I want to take a look at this team, right? Tua, Travis Etienne, Jacobs, I think that's all fine to be a contender. Devontae Smith, let's look at his team before the DJ Moore trade. So it'd be Devontae Smith, Chris Godwin at wide receiver 2. Then you have, like, your wide receiver 3 would be Keenan Allen, Romeo Doubs, wide receiver 4, Adam Thielen 5. So, like, this makes you have a wide receiver room of 6 deep, which I think realistically, I'd probably be looking at more like 7 or 8 receivers in this league that I'd like to have. So I'm not per se going to be fighting the agenda of getting more receivers into this team build, right? Like I have no problem with that, especially ones that can score like DJ Moore can. But based on, Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen coming in, new quarterback play, it's a pretty steep price for DJ Moore in general. But again, just talking out the team first before I get into the details of the trade and why I don't know. This would not be a trade I would be looking to make, and one that I can actually highlight is not something I would be moving my picks to this degree. So when I'm looking at it, DJ Moore sliding in, paying up for that expensive receiver does give you depth, but right now on a weekly basis, is Keenan Allen starting or not starting? Are you sitting Chris Godwin? Do you sit Evan Ingram and Dalton? Who are you having your decisions with in your flex spot? And again, it's funny I mentioned 11 because using that as a hypothetical example, this is a start 11 league, interestingly enough. So we're starting 11 in this format, which means you do want to have more depth. And I've been on record saying that in general, having a little extra depth on a team like this is a good thing. But that also includes, for me, having your assets of future picks, because the difference there with having those picks, while today, week 1, week 2, week 3, you can't put a pick, there's no week in which you can put a draft pick into your lineup. You can not have to go down the road of you're very rigid with a single player. It can go really well, it can go really poor. You could end up having unfortunate thing like JJ McCarthy being out for the season. If that's someone that you paid a liquid asset in currency for, or you even use the draft pick, which in Fade the Fetal, I did draft JJ McCarthy with the first round pick this year. He now is a asset that's cratered. Like, that no longer has that same appeal as a true liquid first. Now, people still will be interested in buying JJ McCarthy, but on the low. Nobody's sending you a trade anymore where JJ McCarthy was as valuable in hypothetical statements as he was in the past when he was healthy. So that now is a cratered asset, which can also not go into your lineup and is now extremely inflexible in trading. So instead of having to go down that path where, while you can start them today in these earlier weeks, you lose the opportunity to avoid any of that could be bad. And also basically kind of hand select depending on what the market has available and what teams are willing to be, buyers of draft picks, and they're going to sell you players. But down the road, you're going to miss out the opportunity of having, that draft capital at your disposal and kind of being able to pick what my team now currently needs when I do have attrition, when there's bye weeks, when I can say this player that I thought was going to be rock solid and a great player for my team is like underperforming, or his quarterback's hurt, or he's like dealing through nagging injuries and he's just not giving you the same level of production. And that's some place that you need to fill the value there. You've already made the purchase. You can't go back to the store 90 days later and say, here, I want my money back because I need to go get something different. No, that's now your personal belonging. You have what comes with that player. So there's some things I think to think about on both sides. But ultimately, when I'm looking at this team, first of all, when I think about it, to be moving my future, like he's already made the trades prior, but to be moving my future where I don't have a single first at my disposal at all, DJ Moore, based on this team, is not enough to say I am now like top dog in this league. His team wasn't at the point to where DJ Moore was like the last piece of his filling of his lineup where it makes sense. All right, now DJ Moore makes him like the clear front runner to win the league. He's still not the clear front runner to win the league. His future's gone. I think you ultimately don't have the greatest team. I definitely understand what you're doing. At this point, you're kind of just leaning into the situation you have with aging players like James Conner, Aaron Jones, Aaron Rodgers. You want to make the push for the title. But you also, your roster construction, at least as I'm seeing it, it's not protected from all this injury problems that could make this team completely derailed from even making the playoffs. But you also, at least for the time being, until that attrition happens, like you kind of have some lineup decisions to make, which is going to be ultimately making it more difficult for you early in the season. So, let's just go through it, okay? So we have Tua Tagovailoa, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, Dalton Kincaid, Evan Ingram, Aaron Jones, James Conner, Aaron Rodgers. For the sake of argument, we're going to leave Evan Ingram in the lineup, and we're going to use the players on the bench to fill in the spots here. So if I'm going to pick 3 very good players on this team that are going to have injuries and see what happens, I'm not going to make them all the best players on the team, but let's say there's something happens to, let's go ahead and we'll use Travis Etienne as one. We will use Tua as the other, and then the third one we'll use Dalton Kincaid. So having Evan Ingram now, currently, Evan Ingram sliding in for Kincaid at tight end, that probably realistically isn't going to be something that makes or breaks your team at all. It's a very easy slot, and that's not a problem. But now Travis Etienne, right? So let's say Jacobs is your one. I think that's not a problem. Like Singletary, while healthy, we don't know what he's going to be in the Giants, but if he's your 2, I have no problem with that either. But now look at the rest of your running backs. Without draft picks of any consequence, you only have 1 second now, and that's out in 2027. So you're going to be kind of fishing the waiver wire for starters here. And you don't have any meaningful draft picks until the 3rd round to kind of go buy players on, let's call it rebuilding teams, that at the right point you can say, like, this would really help my team out. So you don't have the ability to patchwork together even that position very well. And this is with one injury to that position. And I mean, obviously you still have Aaron Jones and James Conner that can slide up. But the point is those are flex spots now that have to be filled with the receivers. So let's talk about the receivers, okay? So we have basically on the bench, when we said that he's going to be losing no receivers on this current build, right? So we said it was going to be Tua, Travis Etienne, and Kincaid, just for the sake of this exercise, right? So your receivers are pretty solid. You basically can, with the receiver position now, probably slide Keenan Allen at 230 pounds. I don't even – these reports sometimes are crazy. The 230-pound version, supposedly, of Keenan Allen into your flex spot and make Ingram go into your tight end spot. Like, you're good there. But the running back, again, you're putting Singletary in for Etienne here, I would still say. So at this point, you're already – thin with not much there, and these are some aging players that we don't even know if they're all going to perform. Like Chris Godwin wasn't a difference maker last year, going back to the slot, but we'll see what that does. Aaron Jones in this Vikings offense with Sam Darnold all year, no J.J. McCarthy. James Conner, I mean, listen, he could end up being great again. It's very possible, but he's also someone that's been injury prone and has had his, let's say, issues staying on the field at times, combined with the fact that they drafted Trey Benson. He may be fine all year, but that's not a guarantee. Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles, extremely old, very talented, but like, okay, let's say Aaron Rodgers now has to go into your quarterback spot. Tua gets hurt. I mean, Gardner Minshew, we don't even, it's not even a decided factor yet. Let's even say he's your super flex. You're kind of just barely skating by with a roster that's even palatable to put into your lineup without any future at all. Like this is honestly probably a little bit more of an extreme version, but this is the type of thing I'm talking about where, yes, I get it. You want to make your team better. You want to go win. The draft picks are not going to be something that you can put into your lineup. So this is why you do this trade. But I think from the majority of the standpoint that I'm looking at and where I like to focus on, is this actually a useful trade that's helping me? Like, am I being intentional about why this is going to help me? I don't think this realistically is a prudent move and something that's like checking the boxes that I'm asking myself when team building. Now, it doesn't have to be the way that you do it, but I'm explaining to you how I go through it and why. Could this team thread the needle? Sure. I mean, listen, variance in fantasy football in general is high. I'm not telling you there's no talent on this team, right? Like if all these players, I mean, that would be extreme, but if all these players hit closer to the high-end range of outcomes that they have, yeah, this team could be good. It could be very good. But there's just not a lot of room for error without any draft picks to kind of backfill, or you don't even have any draft picks at this point to kind of fill and patch up some issues that are going to happen inherently throughout the year for you. You got to have to be a waiver wire god, and you're going to have to get all the breaks in order for this team to work out for this season, and you don't have picks in 2025, 2026, and 2027. One of the things I'll talk through after this is I think some ways that you can think about how to try to thread the needle either way. Ultimately, I'm trying to find the right balance in these type of offers where if the right opportunity presents itself, I'll send away a pick for a specific player to help fill a specific hole and void that I have on my team, if it makes sense. And then also, with the way I have a lot of my teams constructed, there may be some players that ultimately I really like, but when offers come in of this nature, listen, man, DJ Moore, I'll help you pack your things, man. It's time to go. You're going to go play over at Pistol Pete's house. I don't know how that's going to go. I think the disrespect to Pistol Pete Maravich right now feels pretty real. But like, you just got to pocket this 27 first for DJ Moore and a 26 second. So you now have those picks at your disposal to kind of decide if you want to rebuild or if you want to see if you can make the playoffs. The point, I guess, overall is for him right now, it probably isn't warranting enough DJ Moore individually on his own to say, like, the DJ Moore sending away makes him and his team completely dead in the water now. It's not like when you make this trade, I'm not going to be able to overcome this and be a part of, like, contending if I decide to. So if you're already bowing out, there's not even close to a discussion. You take the picks. But for this situation, you can, in similar ways, I think, not even be this far on more of a like light rebuild process where you have a lot of young ascending players. You can probably find a way with your roster construction if it's done correctly, where we talk about, like in a league like this, let's say you have 7 receivers. DJ Moore is going to go for a first and a second with picks down the road. Can I do that where I trade DJ Moore now for those picks? And then with my roster construction and the players I'm looking for, can I buy a Jacoby Myers? Can I now basically net like a full first in value and slide Jacoby Myers into my last flex spot on this league in a start 11, or put him in now as the piece of depth that I have or need on this team? So I don't have DJ Moore maybe quite that upside, but I also still have a pretty good team, and I now have a lot of upside locked and loaded in the chamber in my draft pick room that I can put into a trade, kind of like a 3 first offer for almost any player I want at the right time. You don't even have to go to that extreme, but the point is you have so much more at your disposal, and you can go through now the season and say, week 7, week 8, week 9, you're looking at all the different bye weeks. You're looking at what players are hurt across your team, across other league mates. There's going to be at least one team almost inherently in all leagues that kind of disappoints throughout that point. Maybe you're in the playoff mix more than you thought. And at that point, you might decide to push some of those picks in, even to 2027 first. Whether you decide to keep that or put it out there, adding that to a bunch of first-round picks or second-round picks, that's something that is going to speak to anyone, especially the teams that are bowing out and are rebuilding for this season, retooling for next year. So in general, I think overall the thought process there is making sure that you are having a thought process on why am I moving these picks in, other than they just feel like they're burning a hole in my pocket because I can't put them in my lineup. And going through that process for me, is this trade actually making my team right now that much better on paper? Theoretically. Obviously, we don't know yet for sure. Is it making it theoretically better? What is the purpose of this trade actually filling the void of? And then, is it worth making this trade based on my team, based on the league that I'm in? Am I leaving myself open to massive heartache and you basically are going to have a big vulnerability by making this trade if something goes wrong? Whereas if it goes right here, you've already kind of paid at least what the market is on that, if not more, because picks are starting to become devalued because everybody wants players. So overall, those are the things I think that are important to think about. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this video, talking about this type of thing. Are you someone that has been moving your picks on all your teams? Have you not quite yet? You're thinking about doing it? Let me know where your teams are at and what you're thinking about doing with your draft picks. Ultimately, if you do want to have some deeper discussions on similar stuff to this, make sure you go down and check out becoming a Big Dog member. Go into the Discord. When you get into the BDGE Discord, yell at me. Go ahead. Tag me at ATM. Yell at me. Ask me the specific question. I will make sure over there to give you all the context that you're wanting and dive into it for you as well. But let me know down in the comments if you have any significant trades that went down recently, whether you're sending or acquiring picks, and let me know what you think of this process overall. I'll see you back here, same time, same place, next week as the NFL season is quickly approaching. I'm out of here. Peace.